Hello guys, good evening. Today we will be discussing about recently published research article which was published in European Journal of Cardiology, and this research article is about the differences in cardiovascular disease reduction in between groups of people who did more intense physical activity and more volume of physical activity compared to low intensity physical activity and less volume of physical activity. So obviously this is already known fact that we everyone knows that as much we physical activity we do and as much intense physical activity do, obviously there is a reduction in overall mortality and there is cardiovascular disease risk. But what this study has added extra to our prior knowledge, so that is the main point that we'll be discussing in this lecture. Okay, so let me write a few terminology on this board. So I told you about intensity of physical activity, and volume of physical activity. So this relation to reduction in cardiovascular disease. Okay. So do you know what is the relation between intensity and volume of physical activity? So what is the total volume of physical activity? From the very basics of physics, you know that volume is equal to intensity into time duration. So let's suppose I am giving one example. So let's suppose this is regarding physical activity. Okay guys, so I don't need to tell you again. So this is about physical activity. So let's suppose one person is doing about 40 minutes of strolling. Strolling means this casual walking like this, enjoying the nature. And okay, so let's suppose he is doing strolling for, let's suppose strolling for 14 minutes, let's suppose 14 minutes, and another person is doing brisk walking for 7 minutes. So here you can see the intensity is low here, intensity of physical activity is low here and time duration is more here. Here intensity is more but time duration is less. But what happens that this volume of physical activity is same in this both group of persons. So volume of physical activity is same, but intensity is less intense, and here it is more intense physical activity. Why I have given you this example here is because in this research article they have given this example, and they have found a significant difference between these two category of people. They have found that in this category of people who only do 7 minutes of brisk walking compared to strolling for 14 minutes, they have 14% reduction in cardiovascular disease. Okay, so less time devoted to physical activity, but more reduction in cardiovascular disease. This is one of the major highlights of the study, and the authors have demonstrated it objectively. What do you mean to say that objectively? I mean to say that if you see the prior research articles, majority of the research articles, they have not used objective measures. I mean to say that using device like accelerometer for quantification of the physical activity. But in this research article, they have used accelerometer for measuring intensity, volume of physical activity. So this is one of the major advantage with this research compared to prior research, and the prior researches were also subject to recall bias from the participants, but this is fairly better compared to prior. So that is also one of the major strength of this study. So the take home message of this research article is that if you increase the volume of physical activity, if you increase the intensity of physical activity, obviously you will get more cardiovascular health outcomes. More benefit will be to your cardiovascular. Cardiovascular means ischemic heart disease and cerebrovascular disease. So both will be better. But additional point is that if you increase the intensity of physical activity and even with less time duration, keeping the volume of physical activity constant, you can get more benefit. So you may have a difficulty understanding this point. So let me simplify it for you. So I already told you that volume is equal to intensity into time, intensity of physical activity into time. So if you do more intense physical activity even with low time duration, and if you with the same volume of physical activity, you can get better cardiovascular health. Okay, so this is the take home message of this. So if you just want to only take home message, this you can skip this lecture from here. But if you want to know more detail, now I am going to tell you more about this. So this study was done in UK, and they have used in this they have about 80,000 participants. So fairly large sample size, guys. And this is a prospective cohort study. Prospective cohort study, and they have done follow-up duration for about median duration is 6.8 years. So what is the total person years? Total person year is equal to, if you multiply the time duration into participants, it will get total person years. And I mean to say that total events were about 4,000. Events means cardiovascular events like ischemic heart disease, stroke, in persons who did not have cardiovascular disease, because they have enrolled these 80,000 participants who did not have prior cardiovascular disease. So about total events were about 4,000. Okay. And median age of participants were about 60 years, and so this is also one of the limitation here, guys. You can see the median age is 60 years. The younger age groups are not reflected here, but from intuitive sense we can say that yes, it may be beneficial in younger age groups are also beneficial, but obviously statistical data is needed for evidence-based medicine. No need to say. Okay. So you can see fairly good study. And women, if you see the gender-wise comparison, women were 58%. So fairly good sex distribution also. So this was about methodology of study. So what I told you that increasing intensity of physical activity, keeping volume constant, keeping volume of physical activity constant, there was more reduction in cardiovascular disease. And if you talk about data regarding this study, they have calculated the data, and before understanding that data, you need to understand few terminologies, because you won't be able to understand that without understanding this terminology. For example, they have used the terminology like moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. Another is obviously light intensity physical activity. LI means light intensity physical activity, and MV means moderate to vigorous intensity, and PM means physical activity. And another term is physical activity energy expenditure. I am using the same abbreviation they have used in the article. Okay, so you will have easy reading it if you go through it again. So physical activity energy expenditure, this is the total energy expenditure, and this is expressed in kilojoule per kg per day. Okay, and another terminology is percentage of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. Percentage means suppose a person does physical activity for half an hour, so obviously he cannot do vigorous activity for half an hour. for 10 minutes. Let's suppose he is enthusiastic and did vigorous activity, then he becomes little tired and now doing moderately, and for 10 minutes now he is doing light intensity physical activity. So basically the intensity changes, no. So that's why we need to calculate the moderate percentage of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. You may be wondering that why they have kept this also moderate and vigorous intensity in the same category. They may have separated moderate separately and vigorous intensity separately. So I don't need to tell you why they have done it, because large sample size is needed and power of the study decreases. That's why they have lumped together. Obviously more sample size is needed for that, if you want to analyze separately. I don't have much statistical knowledge regarding those things, so I may be wrong. You may comment down to why they have not used separately this moderate and severe intensity physical activity separately. Just my guess, okay. Now what is percentage of moderate and vigorous intensity physical activity? So this is moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity divided by total physical activity energy expenditure. So let's suppose total physical activity energy expenditure is 200 kilojoule per kg per day, and moderate to vigorous physical activity is, let's suppose he has spent 50. So what is the percentage? 25%. 25% of his exercise is moderate to vigorous intensity, and the rest is light intensity. 75% is light intensity physical activity. So you understood this terminology: physical activity energy expenditure, moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. Now you will have easy understanding the data in this study. So see what they have shown, that they have given one data. They in one group of participants, if they kept moderate to vigorous physical intensity moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity at 20% and reducing it to 10%, they found that if you kept at 20%, there was 14% reduction in cardiovascular disease. And they have cited the same example that I have cited in the beginning of this lecture. What? Strolling for 14 minutes and brisk walking for 7 minutes. So if participants who did only brisk walking for only 7 minutes, half total time duration of strolling, there was 14% reduction in risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay. And another point I would like to tell you is that so they have not so they obviously they tell that intensity, as you increase the intensity you have more reduction in cardiovascular disease, but the same time they have not denied that volume is not that much important. Volume of physical activities is not that much important, because physical activity energy expenditure also matters. Physical activity energy expenditure obviously comprise the total volume. Volume intensity is just only part of the volume. Okay, so this intensity is just nested in the volume of physical activity. That's why obviously physical activity energy expenditure matters. And what they have also found that as there was increased physical activity energy expenditure, there was more cardiovascular disease risk reduction, and simultaneously if there was increase in physical activity energy expenditure and increase in percentage moderate to vigorous physical activity, in this category of patients there was greatest reduction in cardiovascular disease. Okay, and another interesting thing I like to talk here is that they have found that if you keep the moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity constant, they have did with this sensitivity analysis, they kept it this constant, and they checked the different physical activity energy expenditure, comparing it with the cardiovascular disease reduction. Like let's suppose 200 kilojoule per kg per day, and 300 kilojoule per kg per day, 400 kilojoule per day. So if you keep this constant, and if you only compare this with cardiovascular disease reduction, there was not much reduction in cardiovascular disease. So this is also one of the observation that I found while reading this study. So ultimately, what I would like to say that obviously you know the slogan of physical activity guideline, that every move counts. No, what is the slogan? Every move counts. Let me write it. Every move counts. So after listening to this lecture, what do you want to add to this slogan extra? Do you have anything? Do you want to add anything extra? So, but I want to add here one term. Every moderate to vigorous intensity physical move count. Let me write it here. Every moderate to vigorous intensity physical move counts. So I am not denying that every move counts. Volume is obviously important, but intensity is also important after analyzing this study. Okay, guys. So now we are towards the end of the lecture. So what we know that intensity is obviously important. So let's suppose a person is doing 2 hours of strolling daily for about 6 months. Strolling means just going, walking causally, and another person is doing only 1 hour of brisk walking or jogging, or even running for only half hour. So there may be more reduction in cardiovascular disease in those with moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity compared to just light intensity physical activity like strolling. So obviously in this fast-paced world where time is important for everyone, so if you do physical activity vigorously, enthusiastically, even for less time duration, rather than engaging a lot of time in physical activity and doing low intensity physical activity, you will get more cardiovascular health benefit. This is statistically proven by this study. Okay, and this is good news for us because we can manage time also, because this is important. This research is not only important for patients, but for everyone is important. That's why even if we have low time, we engage enthusiastically, vigorously in physical activity for less time duration. Just even if we have 2 minutes to engage 2 minutes or 3 minutes in vigorous physical activity, obviously this has benefit in terms of overall mortality as well as cardiovascular disease reduction. Okay, guys. So with this, I'd like to end this lecture, and I'd like to tell you ultimately that knowledge is not powerful. Knowledge is not powerful. Only execution of knowledge is powerful. Google has a lot of knowledge. There is a lot of knowledge in the hard drive of Google. But with this that much knowledge, Google has not able to manufacture anything. I mean to say that the person involved in with his mind has manufactured, and but only hard drive is not able to produce any significant result. But who takes the knowledge from this and implement in his life, that matters. From there transformation begins. Okay, thank you.